The World Explained. Lecture 5. The Hard Problem of Consciousness.
You walk through a park on a beautiful summer morning. A bright yellow sun shines, climbing into a clear blue sky. Its rays gently touch and warm your skin. Birds sing hymns to the new day from green tree crowns. Why and how do you actually experience all of this, instead of merely registering sensory inputs? Humanity has explained stars, evolution, electricity, gravity, and the origins of life. Modern science can describe the brain's physical activity in extraordinary detail. Yet it still cannot explain why any of that activity is accompanied by conscious experience. This mystery arises from what philosophers call the explanatory gap, the seemingly unbridgeable divide between physical processes in the brain and subjective experience. In this lecture, we will examine that gap from two different perspectives and ask whether it can ever be crossed.
Rigorous attempts to explain consciousness go back at least to René Descartes in the 17th century. Since then, philosophers and scientists have proposed many competing theories, yet no widely accepted solution has emerged. Dualist theories place consciousness outside the physical world, but struggle to explain how a non-physical mind could affect a physical brain. Physicalist theories seek an explanation entirely within neuroscience and physics, yet many leave the explanatory gap untouched, or simply deny that it exists. Some even claim that subjective experience itself is an illusion. More recently, panpsychism has suggested that consciousness is a fundamental feature of matter. But it faces a different challenge, explaining how countless simple experiences of particles could combine into a single unified mind. So why, after centuries of effort, does consciousness remain one of the deepest unsolved problems in philosophy and science?
Let us first approach the problem from a physicalist perspective, the brain's point of view. To better understand the challenge, consider a variation of Frank Jackson's famous thought experiment. Jackson imagines a brilliant scientist named Mary, who spends her entire life in a black and white room. Through books and black and white monitors, she learns every physical fact about human color vision. She knows everything science can tell us about wavelengths, retinal cells, neural pathways, and visual processing. Now, imagine that Mary leaves the room for the first time and enters a brightly lit hallway with one wall painted red and another painted blue. Would she immediately know which wall is red and which is blue without using a scientific instrument? Of course not. Although Mary has learned all the reports of other people's experiences and every available scientific description of color, she is still missing one crucial kind of knowledge: direct sensory experience itself, what philosophers call qualia. No matter how detailed a physical description becomes, the description never contains the experience. We can describe red light by its wavelength. We can describe the neural activity produced by seeing it. But the actual experience of redness can only be understood through experiencing it. In fact, we cannot really explain the sensation of red except by saying, that is what you experience when you see a red object. If someone has never had a particular experience, whether seeing a color, feeling pain, or sensing hunger, it is impossible to fully communicate what that experience is like. Why is this so difficult?
Scientific explanations usually work across at least two levels. One level contains the phenomenon being explained. The other contains a deeper framework capable of explaining it. To explain thunder, we use atmospheric physics, electrical charge separation, lightning discharge, and sound wave propagation. To explain fire, we use chemistry and thermodynamics. oxidation reactions, heat release, and light emission. Likewise, explaining consciousness would seem to require a deeper level of science capable of explaining how subjective experience itself is produced. But can such a level exist?
In previous lectures, we argued that our internal world models, the models necessary for our survival, are built entirely from experience. Sensations are divided into meaningful pieces, organized, connected, and stored in memory. Together, they form everything we know, our entire world. Even our most abstract concepts ultimately trace back to experience. This means that all human knowledge exists within a single domain, the domain of experience itself, the very phenomenon we are trying to explain. We possess no concepts, terminology, or intellectual tools for describing anything in a domain beneath experience, the domain that would explain how experiences are generated in the first place. That limitation is exactly what creates the explanatory gap.
No matter how far biology or neuroscience advances, we remain inside the world built from our experiences. We, humans, will always remain in the auditorium of that theater, watching the show of our senses on the stage. We can study the stage, the actors, and the performance in extraordinary detail, but we will never be able to see backstage to check how the show is produced. Now, let us approach the problem from the opposite direction, from the mind's point of view. We need to reiterate that the world as we know it is our internal model, constructed entirely from the totality of our experiences. We communicate this model to others, and each generation inherits and refines models created in the previous periods. Your body, including your brain, is obviously a part of your world model, a very important part. In that sense, your mind forms a model of your brain just as it forms a model of everything else. Among all the world models humans have developed, the physicalist model, the idea that reality operates according to stable physical laws, has been extraordinarily successful. It allows us to predict events, build technology, and navigate everyday life. It became the foundation of modern science. Our understanding of the brain evolved alongside this broader physicalist model. In ancient Greece, Aristotle believed the brain mainly cooled the blood heated by the heart. Later traditions placed thought within the brain's ventricles. Modern neuroscience eventually identified the brain as the central organ of the nervous system and the physical basis of mental activity. Viewed this way, the brain is itself part of the mind's explanatory framework. It is the mind's model of itself, constructed from experience. This suggests an important shift in perspective. Mind and brain need not be understood as two separate entities or properties interacting with one another. Instead, the brain may be understood as part of the explanatory framework the mind creates to make sense of its own experiences. But it is not that simple.
Let's look again at how we explain phenomena. Every scientific explanation we have ever produced explains one part of our experience by appealing to another part of our experience. We explain thunder through atmospheric processes. We explain disease through biology. We explain planetary motion through gravity. But in every case, both the phenomenon being explained and the explanatory framework belong to the same world model constructed by the mind. Consciousness presents a unique situation. Here, the mind attempts to explain the very thing that makes explanation possible in the first place.
The relationship between mind and brain is therefore not the relationship between two independent things. It is the relationship between what is being explained and the explanation itself.
between the explanandum and the explanans. What makes this case unique is that the explanandum, the mind, is also the very thing attempting to provide the explanation. The hard problem of consciousness is unsolvable because every possible explanation is itself a product of the very phenomenon being explained.
As Erwin Schrödinger, a famous physicist, observed, the reason why our sentient, percipient, and thinking ego is met nowhere within our scientific world picture can easily be indicated in 7 words, because it is itself that world picture.
What would it mean for consciousness to explain consciousness completely? Any explanation we produce would itself appear as another conscious experience, another thought, another concept within the mind. The explanation would never stand outside consciousness, because there is nowhere outside consciousness for us to stand. Just as in mathematics, where a formal system cannot completely account for itself from within itself, consciousness may be unable to provide a complete explanation of its own existence using concepts generated from within conscious experience. We can now see that the infamous explanatory gap is not only impossible to explain away due to a lack of terminology, but may not be a gap at all. The two sides of it belong to different logical categories. That may explain why centuries of effort have failed to produce a satisfactory solution. Science will undoubtedly continue to move closer and closer to explaining consciousness. Our models of the brain will become more sophisticated and more predictive. But a complete explanation may forever remain out of reach. For those who believe they have solved the hard problem of consciousness, consider one final test. Can you provide Mary, while she is still confined to her black and white room, with enough information that she can step into the hallway and say, "Now I can actually see colors. That wall is red and that wall is blue," and then point to the correct walls? If you'd like a deeper and more systematic explanation of these ideas, they're developed in my book, Reality Check. Is the world what you think? The link is in the description below. If you found this lecture helpful, like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for watching.